Sharon?
Yes. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Federation of Credit and Financial Professionals and our technology partner, Credit2B. I am here today with Yasmin Kalikovic, who will be presenting on best practices in electronic billing and payments. A few items to get out of the way before we begin. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, you can ask them through the questions function on your side panel. We will gather all those questions and save them for Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you are looking for a copy of the slides, we will be sending them through email after the presentation. The last item is that we will have a brief survey that pops up after the webinar ends. It only takes about 30 seconds to fill out, but it gives us a lot of great information on how we can continue to make our webinars better for you. Now, to give you a brief intro of our speaker, Ken Frisco, FCFP Operating Board Director, will give you a brief intro of our speaker.
Thanks very much, Sharon. For all those on the phone, just a quick background on Yasmin. He leads the innovation and product strategy for Billtrust's invoicing and payment platforms. A professional in the B2B invoicing and payments industry, Yasmin had worked closely with hundreds of suppliers to establish strategies for accelerating invoice to cash, reducing DSO, and improving operational efficiency. So with that, I'd like to turn back to Yasmin to begin the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for today's webinar. So today we're going to be talking about accounts receivables in the digital age, specifically how some of the advances in the demands on the AP side of the house are making it more and more difficult for AR teams to carry out their jobs efficiently and effectively. But before I get into kind of the nitty-gritty, I'd like to start off with a brief anecdote. So the story begins with a company by the name of MusicBrainz, and you'll see their logo up on the screen there. They're a small nonprofit organization. They're based out in California, and they make music metadata available to the public. And back in 2011, this company, MusicBrainz, was fortunate enough, or so they thought at the time anyway, to work with Amazon. So Amazon hired them to complete a $20,000 data migration project. So MusicBrainz took on the job. They completed it in about 2 months, and then they proceeded to send Amazon an invoice for the full amount of $20,000, net 30 terms. Well, 30 days come and go, no payment from Amazon. So MusicBrainz is thinking, well, you know, it's Amazon, right? They're a big company, things happen, they might be a few days late, no big deal. So they wait another 30 days, still no payment from Amazon, and another 30, and another 30, and another 30. Well, 3 years go by, and Amazon still hadn't paid a single cent of that $20,000 invoice. So, you know, at this point, MusicBrainz decides to do what I would argue any company in their position might want to consider doing after hearing what they did. They decided to send Amazon a cake to commemorate the 3rd anniversary of invoice number 144. And needless to say that the press caught wind of this stunt that they pulled, and Amazon very, very quickly made a payment in full against invoice number 144. So, you know, while this is pretty funny in hindsight, I'm sure you can imagine the plight MusicBrainz must have been going through, right? Because $20,000 is really no small chunk of change, even for a medium-sized business, let alone a small nonprofit. And the reason I bring up this story is because I think it does a good job of highlighting one of the few key challenges that AR teams are facing today. So let's dive into some of those challenges. So the first challenges that many AR teams face today is this growing number of late payments related to that story with MusicBrainz and Amazon. And up on the screen, I have a few stats that I pulled from a study conducted by MasterCard back in 2014. And of the businesses that MasterCard surveyed, 74% of them agreed that late payments are just simply a fact of business life, right? No matter what you do to try and stop them or avoid them, late payments are just always going to be a part of doing business, right? Business is messy. And that's a pretty understandable position to take. But what's even more interesting in this study was that over 50% of respondents said not only were they accidentally making payments later, but they were actually actively delaying payments to suppliers for strategic reasons. And this makes sense, right? Because money on hand now is, of course, better than money later. And AP departments are just as concerned with their own cash flow and increasing their own days payable outstanding as departments are with decreasing their own days sales outstanding and increasing their own cash flow. And as the Fed begins to increase interest rates, which is what we're starting to see already, we'll likely start to see more and more of this type of behavior. Because if you think about it, if, for example, a buying organization, right, is earning 2 or 3% in an interest-bearing account, it won't make much sense to pay an invoice early and in full, even if the supplier offers a 1% early pay discount. In fact, in some cases, these buyers might even decide that they want to pay late, right, because the penalty incurred by paying late is still less than the interest they're earning in some sort of interest-bearing account. And so here's where we really start to see that kind of push-pull scenario between AP and AR, right? There are these competing interests at play between these two counterparts, and that's causing some friction and some issues specifically on the AR side. So the other issue when it comes to AP and AR in that relationship is this growing diversity of invoice delivery and payment channels. So if you go back in time to the early 90s, right, EDI was for all that is kind of the next big thing, right? Everyone would be on EDI, everyone would be transmitting documents electronically, and everything would be well in the world. Well, unfortunately, that's not really how it panned out. Sure, some enterprise organizations are using EDI on a regular basis, but a lot of the small to medium-sized business aren't using EDI, right? What's ended up happening is all these different sized businesses, they took on their own preferences as far as how they wanted to receive documents, specifically invoice documents, and how they wanted to make payments. So if you think about a typical B2B business, right, you probably have a wide array, a diverse client base. You're going to have some small businesses, some mom and pop shops, some medium-sized clients, and then some larger enterprise organizations, maybe some Fortune 1000 type companies. And each of those types of businesses have developed their own preferences for how they want to receive invoices and make payments. So if you think about a small business, right, a mom and pop shop, odds are pretty high that they're going to want to receive a paper invoice in the mail. They want a physical copy of that invoice to store away. Or they might want to receive an email invoice with a PDF attachment, a PDF replica of that exact invoice. Or they might want to receive a QuickBooks attachment, right? They might be using QuickBooks to manage their accounting, and they want you to send a QuickBooks file attachment that they could easily download into their system, or a CSV file that they could easily download. When you look at the payment methods that small businesses are using, those vary too. I mean, and by and large, a lot of small businesses still like to pay with the pesky paper check, but others might want to call you over the phone and give you a credit card number over the phone, or they might want to go to a branch location and pay you that way. So there's a lot of different delivery and payment options that suppliers ultimately have to accommodate. And when you look at the enterprise side, right, enterprise businesses, the larger companies are using much more sophisticated technologies nowadays, and there's been this large shift towards AP automation software. So a lot of these big companies are using AP automation tools and portals and networks, and ultimately it's incumbent on the supplier to log into all these individual portals and manually key in invoice data to actually transmit it over to their buyer. And that causes a lot of heartaches, which we'll get into a little bit later, but it definitely isn't very efficient. And when it comes to making payments, these enterprise businesses have also adopted more sophisticated technology, right? These AP portals are now integrated into these commercial card type programs where these AP teams are able to automatically generate these virtual one-time use credit cards and send them over to the supplier. And again, this causes a lot of manual work, which we'll get into shortly, but the main point here is that there are so many different invoice delivery and payment channels, and the onus is ultimately on accounts receivables teams to figure out how they're going to accommodate all of their buyers in this regard. The other issue is that ultimately ERPs really struggle to solve a lot of AR issues, right? If you were to ask a typical accounts receivables manager, what are you using to manage your receivables process today? Well, odds are pretty high. I'd say 9 times out of 10, they would probably respond with something like, oh, we use SAP, or we use Oracle, or NetSuite, or some kind of ERP solution. And ultimately, my response to that would be, well, those are companies, right? Those are not strategies that you run your receivables program on. And ERPs have shown time and time again, while they're really great at they're good at doing a lot of things decently well, they can't perform specialized functions really, really well. And that's the problem specifically as it relates to accounts receivables. If you imagine a customer calls and you're using an SAP, you're running SAP or Oracle, and they have a question about an invoice, well, you have to go through the ERP system. You have to click through multiple screens to finally find what you're looking for. And it's really a cumbersome process. The user interface is really not all that great. It's difficult to use. It's difficult to learn. And there are also gaps in terms of functionality, right? Sure, a lot of ERP systems can send out emails, right, with potentially a PDF attachment. They can send email bills to your customers. But a lot of ERP systems don't have, they don't come built in with an external portal that your customers could log into to make payments or receive invoices. And the final point I want to make here too is that ERPs are just very, very much IT intensive, right? Anytime you need to make a change or a customization, you find yourself relying a lot on the IT team, right? If your invoice template needs to change, a lot of times those are hard-coded into the ERP system, so you have to reach out to IT to figure out how to go about doing that. So overall, ERPs are not very efficient in managing AR-specific functions and tasks. And this leads me to the final point, which is there's clearly this AR technology gap, right? AR teams find themselves heavily reliant on their ERP system. But when you look at other lines of business, right, when you look at marketing teams, procurement, and especially accounts payable, which we'll talk a lot about, they've all realized that the ERP system just can't perform certain tasks specific to their job as adequately as they'd like them to. So they've looked to third-party providers and software that essentially integrates into the ERP, right? The ERP system is an incredibly important tool. It's the system of record for any business, and it certainly isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But what they're doing is they're extending the capabilities of their ERP to allow it to do things that it otherwise wouldn't have been able to do outside of the box. Unfortunately, however, accounts receivables teams haven't really had any sort of solution or a go-to provider that is able to perform a lot of these AR-specific tasks. They've always relied on their ERP system, and that's caused a lot in the way of inefficiencies. So to quote my favorite shark, we need to stop the madness, right? There has to be a better way to do all of this. There has to be a system or a technology or a strategy or a set of best practices that allows AR teams to more effectively interface with their AP counterparts, get invoices into the hands of their customers as quickly as possible in a way that's most efficient for them and most cost effective, and ultimately just interact with buyers in a customer-friendly way. And thankfully there is, and that's what I'm here to talk to you all about today. So without further ado, let's kind of dive right into it. Let's talk a little bit about, I've split this up into three major sections, and the first section is all about optimizing invoice delivery. How do we get invoices into our customers' hands as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible while minimizing costs? Well, one of the biggest hurdles to efficient invoice delivery is really the paper invoice, right? Customers still want to receive paper invoices via mail, and odds are that preference probably won't be going anywhere anytime soon. So, unfortunately, the answer isn't as simple as just, hey, let's all just go electronic or eliminate paper delivery altogether. We still want to be able to accommodate our customers' preferences, whatever preference that might be. So how are AR teams handling paper invoices today? Well, a few months back, I was talking to one of our clients. They're a large electrical distributor, and I was asking them about their old AR process prior to automating their invoice delivery with BillTrust. And I asked them specifically about their paper delivery process. How were they printing and mailing their paper invoices? And he says, oh, it was terrible. It was an entirely manual process. We had to print invoices from our ERP, and then our AR staff sent the invoices through this envelope stuffing machine. And I said, oh, wow, what would something like that? Well, I've never even heard of that. I didn't know businesses had that kind of machinery in their buildings. What would something like that cost? And he said, oh, it was about $30,000. It's still sitting in our basement, and no one's really using it anymore. And so, up on the screen here is a picture of that envelope stuffing machine, not the exact one they were using, a generic one, but I would argue that not a single AR department in the country should have one of those lying around in their basement or building, right? AR teams are not synonymous with mailrooms. There are so many different things that AR teams could be working on and focusing on, collecting outstanding receivables and then making collections calls being one of a few of those things. They shouldn't be sitting there licking envelopes and stuffing invoices. Instead, I would argue that the paper mail delivery process should be left to a solution or provider who specializes in this type of process. A provider who can really leverage data generated from your ERP to automatically print and send invoices to your customers without you having to ever physically see or touch that paper invoice. But again, also giving you the ability to track and monitor that process and the invoice itself online and digitally. And when you do this, right, when you leverage a third party that takes the dirty work of paper invoice delivery away from you, you're able to do some pretty neat things. And this is just an example of one of those things. So imagine a scenario where a frequent customer of yours places consecutive orders within a given week, and the first order only amounts to $15. Now, if you know they're a frequent customer and they'll be placing more and more orders, it doesn't make much sense to incur a $1.50 charge for all 3 of those individual mailings when you can wait to just combine the invoices into a single envelope and send them all at once, which would only cost you, in this case, 60 cents. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but if you extrapolate that out to thousands of invoices mailed monthly, it really starts to add up quite quickly. And here at BillTrust, we call this process bullpenning. So just a few notes on this. When using a strategy, right, it's important that you have the ability to control the bullpenning process. So at a certain point, a high invoice dollar amount will outweigh that nominal postage and material fee required to send it. So it's smarter in that case to send that invoice immediately so that it gets paid faster. So a smart bullpenning technology will ultimately allow you to set these parameters for a dollar threshold so that when invoices for a certain customer reach a predetermined dollar amount, the invoices are all shipped together. And you should be able to control parameters for maximum hold days, right? So you're not waiting too long for a customer to reorder to hit that threshold you've set. So again, by having the ability to implement controls around this type of process, you stand to save quite a bit of money. And again, it's one of the many technologies that a third-party print integrator can offer, and one that would be very much difficult for your business to carry out or develop in-house. So the second thing I want to talk about as it relates to invoice delivery is this concept of an electronic presentment and payment portal, or an EIPP portal. Now, surprisingly, based on the recent statistics that I've looked at, roughly 50% of businesses still don't offer a customer-facing portal for their buyers to log into, to receive invoices, to view invoices, and make payments against those invoices. And if there's one thing that everyone on this call and this webinar can take away from today, it's that if you don't offer this type of portal, I would highly recommend you look into it a little bit more and do some research. It's an incredibly powerful tool that has a lot of benefits. So I want to just briefly walk through some of the benefits of offering an EIPP portal to your customers. And the first and probably the most evident of those benefits is instant invoice delivery, right? So compared to a typical sending an invoice via U.S. mail, right, that's normally going to take anywhere from 3 to 5 business days to get to the recipient, depending on where you are and where they are. But that really isn't an issue with an EIPP portal, right? Assuming it's directly plugged into your ERP system, anytime an invoice is generated for a customer, it's automatically displayed in their account within that EIPP portal. So they're receiving it instantly, and if they want to make a payment as soon as it's generated, it's ready for them to be able to do that. So again, the speed of invoice delivery is really a key benefit of an EIPP portal. In the same vein, right, in the same concept, you're receiving payments faster through an EIPP portal. Again, a lot of buyers, the paper check is still around. They'll send a paper check, and that again can take anywhere from 3 to 5 business days to arrive. But when you offer payment capabilities through an EIPP portal, they're able to pay whether it's via ACH or via credit card, and those funds are delivered to you within 1 to 2 business days, depending on which method they're using. So faster payments are really a key benefit to having and offering an EIPP solution. Another benefit is really simplified cash application. And this one I think is sometimes often overlooked because if you have this EIPP solution, it's plugged into your ERP system. You imagine a customer logs into a portal, they choose which invoices they're paying you for, and they initiate an electronic payment. Well, now you know exactly what invoices they're paying, right? As opposed to receiving a paper check for $10,000 with no remittance, you have no idea what that payment is for. Well, with the portal, you won't have to worry about that because they're selecting exactly which invoices they're paying for, and a payment file can essentially be sent or delivered right into your ERP system, and it would automatically close out those invoices because it knows exactly what invoices that customer is paying for. So, cash application, simplified cash application is a real powerful benefit that an EIPP portal can offer. And the last point, which is also, pretty evident, is this idea of offering 24/7 self-service to your buyer base, right? So a lot of times what might happen is, you have customers calling, they want a copy of an invoice sent via email or resent via email, they want to call to make a payment over the phone, and, let's face it, right? The customer probably doesn't want to be calling you time and time again to be able to do all of those things, right? If they had an online portal that allowed them to self-serve and do all of this on their own, they would probably be happier with that. And so by having this EIPP portal, they'd be able to do that, and it would also help minimize a lot of the inbound customer service related calls going into the AR team. They won't have to be manually going through the ERP system to find out, how to resend this invoice. It's all available online 24/7. Your customers could leverage it whenever they want. So again, an EIPP portal is really something that could really benefit an organization. And again, if you don't have it, if you don't offer it to your customers today, I definitely would recommend you think about it some more and look into it. So the final piece of invoice delivery is delivery into your customers' AP portals. So this is a real big pain point I've seen, especially in the clients that I've talked to. A lot of AR teams now are doing business with a variety of different buyers who are on a variety of different AP platforms. And so what they inevitably end up having to do is, the buyer says, hey, I need invoices delivered into this AP network, log into this portal, and manually key in all of those invoice details and send them over to me. And if you have a buyer base that, across your entire buyer base, they're using a total of, 6, 7, 8, even 10 AP portals, that could be really problematic. You're going to have to log into each of those individual portals and manually key in invoice details. So it's really time consuming, really resource intensive, and certainly not ideal. The other issue too with this is, by virtue of manually keying in all this information, that's an error-prone process, right? So if an AR clerk accidentally mistypes an invoice number and they submit it into that AP portal, well, that's going to kick out as an exception on the AP side. And then they're going to have to call you to figure out what invoice you were actually meaning to type in, and that could even further delay the payment process. So again, nothing is very ideal about manually logging into these portals to enter invoice details. The other option you could potentially have, that you might potentially decide on, is, well, you can integrate into each of these individual AP networks through your ERP system. You could have your IT team go into your ERP, figure out how to integrate with an Ariba or a Tungsten. The problem with this is it could be incredibly complicated, it could be incredibly expensive, and it could take anywhere from 6 months to a year to complete a project of that size and that magnitude. It really is a complicated ordeal to integrate with each of these individual AP networks. And again, if you have 5 or 6 different AP networks you're normally logging into, it could take a really, really long time to integrate into each of those individual portals. So really none of these solutions are ideal, but thankfully there is an ideal solution. And that ideal solution entails what I would call a third-party integrator, a middleman, if you will, that sits between the AR and the AP functions, that has already built in those integrations into all of those AP systems. So as I mentioned earlier, you could take the route of integrating your ERP into all these individual networks and do it yourself, but there are already integrators out there who've done all of that legwork. They've already built out that infrastructure. They've built those data feeds into every AP network imaginable, and they can easily facilitate the transfer of invoice information from the supplier over to the buyer. And that's really the ideal scenario, right? A scenario where the third-party integrator plugs into your ERP system, pulls all the relevant invoice data out for your customers that want invoices delivered to the AP networks, and then it knows based on that information which invoices and which customer invoices to send to which AP portal, and it does it for you automatically. So these third-party integrators can really, really be powerful. And if you're a business that's really struggling, you have a lot of different AP portals you find yourself manually logging into every day, this is definitely something to think about and consider to help alleviate some of that manual work. So next, I want to discuss invoice payments, right? How do we optimize invoice payments? How do we get invoice payments? How do we get payments in the door faster? And how do we do so in a cost-effective way? And of course, while making sure that our customers are satisfied. I'm going to focus specifically on credit card usage today, more specifically commercial card usage. So credit card usage and commercial card usage is really probably one of the fastest growing payment methods in the B2B space today. And there are really a number of reasons for this. So at a very, very high level, you know, when you look at it from the card brand and the issuing bank's perspective, they have every incentive to want to push commercial card usage onto their commercial clients, right? Because of course they make money off of every single transaction that's made on one of those commercial cards. So they're making a proactive effort now to really grow B2B spending in the commercial space. And you know, it's not just the banks that really love commercial cards. Buyers also love commercial cards. They probably stand to gain the most out of using commercial cards because there are just a ton of benefits that go into using a commercial card in that space. And some of the examples of those benefits would be, well, for one, right, as a buyer, if you use a commercial card or a credit card, or you're artificially extending your credit terms, right? If you have net 30-day terms with the supplier, you're a buyer, and you pay on the 29th day with a card, and your statement isn't due for another 2 weeks, well, now you've extended your terms artificially by an extra 2 weeks. You've increased your float by that time. So using credit cards on the buyer side makes a lot of sense in that regard. You know, cards are also very convenient for a lot of these AP departments too, right? A lot of these commercial card programs now, they provide the AP departments with a ton of controls, right? They could set minimums and maximum limits as far as which employees are allowed to use which card and how much they're allowed to spend on those cards. So there's definitely a huge convenience factor there when it comes to using cards. They're also earning a lot of rebates, right? They're able to earn points and miles that executives could use when they're traveling. And, you know, that's as opposed to using your ACH or bank account, right? If they were to use their bank account, well, they're not getting any points. They're not getting any sort of rewards whatsoever. So they're really incentivized to start using commercial cards because they get some sort of reward versus none at all using your bank account. And finally, and I'd say probably the most important reason for this increased trend is because commercial cards are now being baked in and integrated into a lot of the AP systems we talked about earlier. So if you imagine a typical AP workflow, a typical AP department using one of these AP automation softwares, what normally happens is they receive an invoice, it's sent through the workflow approval process, it's ultimately approved by the top approver, and then a one-time use credit card is generated for the exact amount of that invoice and automatically sent out to the supplier. So no one has to sit there and actually make a payment, right? As long as it's approved, that payment is automatically generated, and there's not much else they have to do. So it's an entirely automated process, and buyers really, really love that. Unfortunately, the story isn't as rosy on the supplier side, right? I mean, there are a few key benefits to accepting credit cards, and one of those is, well, satisfying customer demand, right? As more and more customers want to start paying by card, you know, suppliers might realize, hey, we have to accept credit cards. We just have to because that's how they want to pay us, or else we run the risk of losing them as a customer. The other benefit is, well, the faster time to get paid, right? Again, as opposed to a paper check, which could take days to get through in the mail, and then another few days to actually apply. You know, a credit card payment hits your bank account within a day or two. So the faster payments is definitely a positive for the cards, for accepting credit cards. The issues, though, you know, a lot of times tend to, in the minds of suppliers, outweigh the positives, and those issues are a few, actually. There's high fees, right? A lot of these cards come with high interchange fees that it's ultimately incumbent on the merchant or the supplier to pay. There's a lot of PCI concerns and risk around PCI, right? You have to have these annual audits related to PCI. You open yourself up to risk. There's a lot of manual keying that goes into some of these credit card payments that suppliers are receiving as well, which we'll get into a bit later. But I want to talk first about the high fees, right? There are ways to make credit cards much more cost-effective in terms of suppliers accepting credit cards. So I want to talk about some ways that we can make that more of a price-competitive payment channel, and specifically how we could decrease some of those interchange fees. So for those of you who might not be ultra familiar with interchange fees, I just want to briefly go over what that means, right? There's level 1, level 2, level 3 interchange. And I want to briefly describe what the differences are between each of those. So, you know, looking at level 1, if you imagine, you know, you go to Target and you buy a toaster, and you go to the cash register and you pay with your credit card. Well, that transaction is a level 1 transaction, right? There is a very, very limited amount of data that's being transmitted over to the card brands with that transaction, right? You're getting customer location, you're getting the transaction amount, the zip code, the date. It's really rudimentary information, and the card brands don't like that. They see that as more of a risky transaction Because, and if you look at the consumer space, obviously there's a lot more fraud in the consumer space in general, but not having as much information as they'd like in the minds of the card brands makes that transaction more risky. But the good news is, if you simply send more data to these card brands, right? If you're transitioning over to the B2B space now, if you send more data related to that transaction over to the card brands and to the issuing bank, you actually stand to receive a lower interchange fee simply by doing that. So if you look at level 2, if you package up your payment, the customer payment, with invoice level details related to the tax ID number, for example, or the customer code, the customer state code, you're qualifying for a better rate than if you were to send only level 1 data. And then, of course, you get to level 3 data, and that essentially means you're taking every payment from a customer, you're attaching as much invoice level details as possible, pretty much everything related to that invoice, down to the line item, the product name, the code, and you're sending it over to the card brands. And because you've sent all that information to them, you're qualifying for the best possible interchange rates. Now, one thing I really, really want to stress here is that, if you're not optimizing interchange, if you're not sending level 2, level 3 data, you have all of that data already in your ERP system. I mean, if you're in the B2B space and you have customers, you have that data already. If you're not qualifying for these lower rates, that simply means that your ERP or your merchant service provider is unable to package up that data and send it along with that transaction over to the card brands. So again, I want to stress that everyone on this call has the data to qualify for level 2, level 3. It's just a matter of being able to technically send that data over to the card brands. So to kind of illustrate the potential power of qualifying for the top tier savings, the level 3 savings, I put together a short kind of calculator here. And assuming that, let's say you're receiving $5 million in monthly card payments, and of those, 30% of those card payments are eligible for level 3 transactions, right? A lot of times it depends on what card is actually used. Visa and MasterCard have a pretty complicated interchange schedule, so certain cards may or may not qualify for level 3 interchange. But in this case, let's assume that 30% of those are eligible. That means that $1.5 million worth of those card payments are eligible for level 3 savings. And the average savings for level 3 is roughly around 0.5%. And again, the Visa and MasterCard interchange schedules are pretty complicated, so there are a lot of factors and variables. But at Billtrust, on average, we've seen that you save roughly 0.5% per transaction with level 3. So ultimately, you end up saving $7,500 a month through level 3 optimization, and that's $90,000 annually. So that's a really nice chunk of change for really not doing much. Again, you have this data available. It's just a matter of being able to package it up and transmit it over to the card brand and to the issuing bank to qualify for those level 3 rates. So aside from interchange optimization, there are, of course, other ways that you could make credit cards a potentially price competitive payment channel. And again, we're assuming that in this case, we're assuming that you're absorbing the card cost, right? If you're absorbing the interchange fee, you're dealing with it, you're still accepting credit cards, you're going to deal with the interchange fee. What are some ways that we can help minimize the cost of accepting credit cards? Well, there are really a few ways that you could do this. For one, you could prevent early pay discounts when a credit card is used by your customer. And this makes a lot of sense, right? Because you wouldn't want to get into a situation where a customer is paying early, they're earning an early pay discount, and then you're also incurring a fee on that interchange fee because the credit card was used. So you want to avoid having to be kind of double charged for that single transaction. So by preventing early pay discounts when a card is used, you're only paying for that interchange fee. You're not also discounting the invoice as well and losing more money. The other alternative is you could use selective acceptance, right? So let's say you're using, again, an EIPP type portal, a customer-facing portal. You should be able to designate within that portal which of your customers are allowed to pay by credit card, right? Because you may have a certain subset of customers who are maybe higher risk, right? They tend to pay later and later. So you want to avoid giving them the ability to pay with a credit card because, again, you don't want to incur fees on top of potentially late payments. So again, having this ability to offer a certain group of customers access to credit card payments, it could be a pretty neat way to minimize some of the costs. You could also set the ability to pay with a card to expire within X number of days. So I just chose 15 days here arbitrarily. But again, you could decide that, hey, I want to accept credit card payments, and it makes sense for me. I'll eat the interchange fee as long as my customers pay me early enough. Right? If they pay me early enough, in my mind, that's offsetting a lot of the costs related to the interchange fees, because now I have that money on hand earlier versus later or at the end of a payment term. So that's another strategy that you could implement. Finally, you could also mandate paperless invoicing when a card option is available. And as I'm sure we all know, issuing paper invoices is expensive, right? Just the material cost and a lot of the manual labor that goes into that isn't an expense in and of itself. So when someone wants to use a credit card, you should mandate having them go paperless and receiving their invoices online, so you offset some of those costs. So diving in a little deeper into the commercial card landscape and the commercial card landscape, commercial cards, as I mentioned, they're growing rapidly. They're growing at a roughly 9.7% growth rate annually. But within that subset, within that umbrella, commercial cards house a lot of different types of other cards, right? There's purchasing cards, there's fleet cards, there's virtual cards, single-use accounts. There's a lot of different types of cards within that commercial card umbrella. And I want to specifically focus on the virtual card. So the virtual card is the fastest growing type of commercial card right now in the B2B space, growing at about 24% annually. And there are a number of reasons for this. So let's kind of dive into first, what is a virtual card, right? Well, to the right of the screen there, you'll see an example of what a virtual card payment looks like coming from an AP department or coming from your buyer. It's this email. You're prompted to log in to reveal the full card number. You see parts of that card number, and then you have to log in to actually retrieve the full credit card number. And this could be pretty problematic for the AR team for a number of reasons, right? So the first is, it's really not easy. If you're getting a ton of emails, a ton of virtual card payment emails from your customers, you have to log into each of these different web pages. You might have to create an account, create credentials. Finally, you get to retrieve that credit card number, and then you have to go in and process that credit card number. You have to key that credit card number into your terminal, whether that's a physical terminal, walk over to another desk with a physical terminal, log into another portal, right, your merchant service portal, to key in that information into your terminal. And then you have to worry about manually applying that cash into your ERP system, right? So there's a lot of manual processes that go into virtual cards and processing virtual cards. And we're seeing them, especially amongst our client base, where we've seen virtual cards growing very rapidly in terms of the number of AP departments who are using them to make payments. Because again, it goes back to that original point I mentioned, where it makes their lives so much easier, right? All of it is automated, and these virtual card payments, these emails that you see, they're generated automatically. So they have every incentive to use them, but it's causing a lot of issues on the AR side. So how do we solve for that, right? Well, thankfully there's some pretty neat technology that exists out there today that is really able to fully automate the virtual card processing. And it really all starts by having buyers send an email, having buyers send all of these card payments, these emailed card payments, over to a dedicated inbox. Right, and there's technology that exists today that can essentially scrape those emails and pull all of the relevant card information from those emails and even log into the portals automatically on your behalf using credentials and pulling all of that card information from those emails and from those websites, and then automatically processing those payments for you, and then simply sending you a payment file at the end of the day saying, hey, here are all the virtual card payments we've received. Here's all the invoices there were for. You just plug it right into your ERP system, and it's a done deal. So you've effectively eliminated all of the manual steps related to virtual card processing, right? You're no longer logging into those portals to retrieve information. You're no longer keying in credit card numbers into your credit card terminal, and you're no longer manually applying cash within your ERP system. So there are technologies that exist that do help automate this process. And again, if you found that you have started receiving these emailed card payments, that's what a lot of our customers call them, emailed card payments. There are a lot of different names for it, but they're usually virtual cards that are being sent via email. If you found yourself receiving a lot of these, then you definitely might want to think about a way to automate that process versus having to do it manually. Finally, the last bit before we wrap up is I want to talk a little bit about electronic adoption. So, in a perfect world, right, your business would send 100% of invoices electronically, and they would receive, and you'd receive 100% of your payments electronically, making cash application simple. And while businesses are slowly adopting electronic invoice presentment and payment, paper checks still account for over 50% of all B2B payments. And many businesses still prefer to receive paper invoices. So that transition is happening, but it's happening slowly. So, in the meantime, right, it's not only important that you offer your customers multiple presentment and payment options, it's also critical that you proactively work to move them towards your electronic delivery and payment channels and educate them about the benefits of doing so. And this is what really sets Billtrust apart, as we focus a lot on electronic adoption. We not only enable businesses to send invoices and receive payments through multiple channels, we help customers through each channel at their own pace, saving money in cash application, making cash application easier every time a customer gets one step closer to full electronic presentment and payment. So again, it's moving customers from paper presentment all the way to online payments. And in a lot of cases, that can mean dedicating some of your time and resources to doing that, knowing that it would be incredibly beneficial from a cost savings perspective, essentially. By getting a customer from paper all the way to online payments, you're saving a ton of time, saving a ton of money, and you're making cash application incredibly easy by doing that. So a focused effort in this regard is really critical. It's where a lot of AR teams should start focusing their efforts. And there are a number of strategies to do this, right? There's a number of ways to help move your customers from paper to electronic. And one of the most effective ways I've found anyway is calling your top 100 paper customers and letting them know that you now have this electronic alternative to receiving invoices and making payments. And at Billtrust, we've found that it's actually incredible. When I first heard about this as a kind of a best practice, I said, oh, it's kind of calling people. I didn't think it would have that much of an effect. A vast majority of those top paper customers that Billtrust calls on behalf of our clients, they decide to switch over to electronic invoicing and payments. And that could save a ton of money. If you think about how many paper invoices your top paper customer is receiving on a monthly basis, and then in one fell swoop you convert them over to electronic, you're saving a ton of money on paper costs, on mailing costs, postage costs. And it really is as simple as picking up the phone and giving them a call. So if you haven't tried that already, that's definitely a quick win in terms of converting some of your high volume paper customers over to electronic. Another strategy you can implement is on-bill messaging, right? So if you have an invoice template that allows you to insert messaging within that invoice somehow, a section for promotions or what have you, you could easily incorporate some sort of message that talks about the benefits of your online portal offering, right? Helping customers, letting them know that you have this online portal, that it exists, and if they want to receive that same paper invoice online, they can do so by signing up at this link. So it's not as kind of in your face as calling them and asking them to switch, but over time, seeing that message time and time again on the invoices they're getting from you could ultimately compel a large majority of your customers to make the switch. Another alternative, another option is essentially setting up marketing emails to promote online billing. So if you know you have, let's say 1,000 customers who are receiving email bills from you, you already have their emails handy. So why not start reaching out to them, have either marketing reach out to them or have your AR team reach out to them and let them know about the benefits, right? Launch a full-blown email marketing campaign and let them know that they can now pay their invoices electronically. And again, we do this on behalf of a lot of our Billtrust clients, and we found a lot of success in setting up these marketing emails. And the beauty is you could track them, or you could track their effectiveness, which is also really nice. And finally, another option is you could change your credit application, right? So when someone first fills out a credit application, you could let them know that by default, you're going to be sending invoices via email, and you can collect that email address information from that credit application, and you're essentially by default setting up everyone for electronic billing. So that's also another kind of quick win that'll get a few of your customers to convert over to electronic billing. So again, just a brief recap. So today we learned that automating print, electronic, and AP delivery is really critical, right? It's critical that you're able to quickly and efficiently get invoices into your customers' hands as quickly as possible, and even getting them into those AP networks, right? You want to automate as much of that as possible, and you want to make sure that you're meeting customer preferences and delivering them into the right portals or into the right through the right delivery channels. You also should maybe consider level 2, level 3 optimization for savings, right? Again, the data already lives within your ERP system. It's just a matter of getting that data over to the card brand so that you qualify for those best rates. You should also maybe reconsider your credit card policy, right? Again, going through some of those options that we discussed earlier, mandating paperless invoicing if a customer decides to use a credit card. There are a lot of strategies and policies that you could implement that really offset the cost of interchange fees. So maybe consider relooking or revisiting your credit card policy. Think about automating virtual card acceptance, right? Even if you're not receiving emailed virtual cards today, as I mentioned, virtual card usage is growing rapidly among the accounts payable space. And I would imagine that if you're not seeing them yet, you definitely will start to see them soon. So, it's never too early to start thinking about, how you're going to go about dealing with those virtual card payments, those email payments as they start to come in. And finally, create a strategy to increase electronic adoption, right? I mean, it's always important that, you might have an online portal that you offer customers, but if they don't know about it, if no one's using it, then it's kind of useless, right? You want to make sure you're making a proactive effort to push customers to electronic billing and payment alternatives, and thinking about a long-term strategy for electronic adoption is really critical. And before we wrap up, I'd be remiss not to mention that BillTrust does offer technologies and solutions that help address many of the pain points that we've addressed here today. We're a service as a software provider that helps AR teams automate the entire invoice-to-cash process and ultimately more effectively transact with your buyers. So with that said, that wraps it up on my end. And I believe we're going to be opening it up for questions at this point. So feel free to use the chat box within the GoToMeeting panel, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Okay, Gasman. I don't see any questions as of yet.
Okay.
So if everyone does not have any questions, I will provide Gasman's email when I send the PDF version of the presentation later today, and you can follow up directly.
Okay. Yeah, my email address is also on the screen as well. So if you guys want to jot that down, feel free. But yes, I'm always open to questions. Email me or call me at any time.
Okay. Well, with that said, we're going to close today's webinar. I would like to thank Gasman for taking the time to present to our group today, and thank all of today's attendees for taking time out of their day to join us. Thank you all again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.